Welcome. Thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Andrew Poland. I'm with APC by Schneider Electric and I'll be your host today. We have some really exciting topics that we're going to dig into. Topics that we believe to be very impactful in the industry. Topics focused around the edge and distributed IT environments. To have the discussion, I have my colleagues with me. Mr. Brian Stevens, he's our Vice President of the National Sales Organization. Now, Brian also leads our software teams across North America. And Brian's organization works with customers on a daily basis who are navigating the challenges of deploying edge environments and managing the distributed IT space. And Joe has extensive experience within the industry. He not only has worked with Fortune 500s, managing, owning, running, designing data centers, but more importantly, has had responsibility over vast networks of distributed IT spaces. So Brian, Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for having us. Really excited, very happy to be here. It's an exciting topic, one that, as you mentioned, is going to have a big impact on the industry. And even more importantly, I think it's going to have a profound impact on all of our daily lives in the future. So it's a fantastic topic to get into.
Well, thank you, Andrew, Brian, for having me here. I'm really excited to get into this. This is one of the things that it's new, it's exciting, it's also a little bit confusing. We're going to try to separate a little bit of that confusion, bring everything back down into reality, and talk about what's really important here in the edge to make us more effective, more efficient, and more effective as we roll forward. I'm really excited to get into this. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think it'll be a great discussion. You know, we spent some time covering the topic and we have quite a bit of stuff we can discuss with you today. So, Brian, edge, distributed IT, you really can't talk about the topic without hitting on digitization, IoT,
Sure.
cloud computing, hybrid computing, all this stuff, the list goes on and on. So really, what is this series about?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. Appreciate it. Look, in a time where everything, everywhere is being digitized, there are just a tremendous amount of technologies that are being deployed, from robotics to artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT. And the reality is businesses, as you know, need these technologies to be competitively positioned versus their competition. And with these technologies comes some complications and challenges like bandwidth issues or latency issues, sometimes regulatory requirements. And the reality is, with a centralized data center approach, these challenges cannot be solved, okay? And so as we look at the edge environment, there's a real practical change that needs to take place to become more efficient with the way we're deploying these sites. As a result, from a practical sense, as we look at deploying edge environments to be more efficient, there really are some changes that need to be made. In this series, over the next 4 episodes, is really about dissecting those local edge applications. Now, as we talk about edge, there is a debate that constantly is going on about the speed or pace of acceleration around edge computing. And it's really centered around MEC, or multi-access edge computing. And the reality is this debate is fair, and it centers upon 2 things. One is the network readiness challenges that exist today, and 2 is the speed at which 5G is going to be deployed, okay? And it is absolutely true that there are a lot of use cases that are going to be enabled by 5G that we could debate the speed at which they will be deployed. However, edge is here today. It really is here today. And there are a lot of applications around a lot of verticals like healthcare, retail, manufacturing, banking, even campuses, where the discussions we're going to be getting into are extremely relevant. We see many customers who are expanding and they're deploying new sites. We also see a lot of customers who are upgrading existing sites, and they're trying to take advantage of IoT and big data. So it's really a relevant conversation across the board, regardless of what your position is. Okay. One last point I would like to make before we jump into it with Joe is that if you look at local edge computing, there are 2 attributes to these sites that really make it difficult to drive to the resiliency levels that are going to be required, okay? First is most of these sites, not all of them, but most of them are unmanned sites,
Right.
meaning that they don't have local staff for IT and facilities. The second is that there are a large number of sites that are geographically dispersed. And as local edge computing sites expand and the criticality becomes higher and the resiliency requirements increases, these two factors are really going to be game changers in the way that we design, deploy, and operate.
So Brian, I heard changes here, changes coming, practical adjustments are needed, and the local edge is critical and will only become more and more critical. So Joe, I want to bring it back to you for a second. Level set quick. Can you help us understand how the local edge interacts with the core? So your regional space, your centralized data centers, and how it all comes and wraps into one.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, guys. So I think, first I'd like to say, first and foremost, edge, right? It's really pushing applications, data, and services, okay, closer to the point of use, closer to the consumption, okay? And what's important to realize about this is that the local edge does not need the centralized cloud, but oftentimes, most likely, it's going to interact with it. And the way I like to kind of sort of describe this is we've been growing up in a world of, let's call it, a fat cloud and a thin client. And by that, I mean this. Everybody take your cell phone out. I know you all got one. Come on. You're not fooling me. All right, take it out and put it in airplane mode. What do you got? And as I look around, probably you've got a fancy computer with a nice calculator on it. But 90% of the function is lost because it has lost connection with the core. Now, as we think about the use cases, Brian mentioned a little bit, and what we start to see is, holy cow, gosh dang, if I lose connection with the core, is my edge or is my application, is my use case going to stop? And the answer is that is the birth of the edge, and that is it won't stop. And so we're moving now then to a thin cloud and a fat client. Okay, whereby, let's take the autonomous vehicle. Everybody wants to use autonomous vehicles. I know, you're rolling your eyes, I know, but we're gonna use it here. But let's just pretend that we did lose connection with the core. Do we expect the autonomous vehicle to do what your cell phone does when you go into airplane mode? The answer is no. So now then we're starting to get a little bit of understanding of how we're moving to now a thin cloud with a fat client where the client has got a tremendous amount of compute, network, and storage. Again, remember, applications are moving there, right? And so what we're starting to see is, as you see on screen here, small environments that are incredibly critical and impactful to what we're doing today. And by the way, it's edge because remember, if we lose connection with the centralized cloud, we do not lose 90% of its function. And I think that's really, really important as we start to move forward here. So we have edge that we can think about in containerized aspects and cell towers, but what we're talking about here is distributed IT at the edge. And all of you are very familiar with these types of closets, small deployments, whether it's in retail, healthcare, finance, higher education, government, okay, and even industrialized applications. Oil and gas are really starting to come up and leverage high compute network and storage now being at the edge, making life a lot easier. And all these use cases that we're dreaming about are now starting to come to life.
Absolutely.
So I think we've level set. We understand what we're going after today, what the edge is, what the distributed IT environment challenges are. Let's just take a quick glimpse into what you can expect from us in the future. So when we think about distributed IT, when we think about edge, we really break it up into 4 pillars. And that's why we're hosting a 4-part webinar series. So today, pillar 1, standard designs. We'll get into that in just a minute. Part 2, we'll be working with Spiceworks to schedule a date. Date is to be determined. Be on the lookout for your invite. But we're going to really start to delve into transparency and visibility and managing the entire environment. The third part will be the operational maintenance. And then the fourth part is really going to tie it all together. So as your distributed IT environments become a lot more important to the overall business strategy of the organization, we're really going to get into how to manage this space as a profitable business model. So, Joe, back to you. Standard designs. Why is this even a pillar? Why do standard designs matter? What are we going to learn today?
It's a great question, Andrew. I think it's really important to think about this in this way. When we talk about edge and we talk about distributed IT, it's automatically we're referring to multiple locations. Okay, and oftentimes it's a high volume of those locations. All right, and so when we start to think about, well, as a businessman, what we all want to be able to do is we want to be able to operate our business in the most cost-effective and the most risk-tolerant way. And this is I think really important, and I get excited about this, frankly, because as Andrew said, I've been very lucky to be in the business for many, many, many years. One of the things that is really the 90% of the cases, 90% of the time is this: if I want to reduce my risk, I oftentimes have to increase my cost. Okay, so in other words, if I want to go N to 2N, yes, my risk went down with 2N, but so my cost went up. Okay, now, if we start getting into edge and distributed IT, standard designs start to do a couple of things for us, guys. What they start to do is they start to actually optimize our cost and optimize our risk. In fact, lowering the risk, okay? And which this helps us do a couple of things. When we develop a standard design, it is automatically going to be easily repeatable. And you look, this is 2019, right? We all want it now. We all want it as fast as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Okay, instant gratification is upon us, everybody. It's the way of life. Standard designs allow us, okay, to rapidly deploy at scale. And if I can rapidly deploy at scale with the reduced cost and an optimized risk model, you can clearly see why standard designs really is a key pillar in having an effective, okay, and efficient edge, okay? And you know, something else too, we can't forget about this, right? People, all right? People are an important aspect, right? And happy people oftentimes are very more productive than ones that are stressed out, the hair's on fire, kind of sort of thing, right? Okay, hey, a standard design starts to help eliminate a little bit of stress from our IT folks. Our IT professionals have a little bit more of a relaxed environment here with the standard. They know what to expect, they know how to expect it, they know how it's going to be deployed, they know how it's going to be maintained. That's really important, okay? So this is really, really important, I think, as we start to think about the benefits of a standard design, okay, and edge computing. And there's a couple of steps I think we'll get into in a few minutes as to how did we do that,
Yeah.
right?
Joe, you know, when you talk about standard designs, are you referring to architecture, hardware only, or are you talking around other aspects of the deployment, software, operations?
Well, that's a great question, and really, we're going to start to get into this in some depth. It's got to be all of it, Brian. It has to be all of it, right? If we can't imagine, how many of y'all have children? Tons, right?
1 year old.
Yeah. You have a baby monitor in your room?
Yes.
Yeah. That's kind of transparency, right? That's kind of, so we're starting to bring in software, we're starting to bring in hardware, we're starting to bring in, and really what's important too is the IT kit. What is the IT kit going to do? How is it going to perform? What is its requirement to perform? And when we think about all of those things, Brian, it's a great question, right? We can't really do it unless we bring it all together, all right, and a standard, and we're matching the standard to the business application and the risk model. That's really key. That's a great question. That's a great question.
So Joe, I'm going to challenge you a little bit here.
Oh, boy.
Okay? So
Sheesh.
it's easy for us to sit here and say, this is how it needs to be done, this is how it is, this is what you need to do. So let's step back a second and say, all right, well, what is everybody else in the industry saying? Are we all kind of on the same page here? What else is out there?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, I would say generally speaking, we're all on the same page, but with anything with varying opinions and subject matter experts, you're going to hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people. But in general, I think everybody's on the same page. Our friends here at Cisco, I think, have come up with a very good, I like this. The modern data centers, wherever data and applications are. Okay, that kind of speaks to edge. Okay, and as we talked about, edge is going closer to where the consumer is, the point of use, and the application to which it's serving. Right. All right. So if we're going to do autonomous vehicles in one city, we're not probably going to put that 6,000 miles away or 4,000 miles away. Right. That's going to have to start to come closer to it. So as you can see, everybody is in agreement that it's getting closer to the point of use. And I like to say it that way, the point of use, rather than the consumer, because who knows where the point of use is? It may not necessarily be a human consumer, right? So the industry's kind of sort of saying it's all pushing out, it's getting closer to the consumer, right? And I think that's accurate. I really do.
Yeah, I think that's great. And to me, it's clear that there is a common theme that the edge environment is much more critical. Network performance, it truly is a part of the overall business strategy, and it's something you need to be thinking about on a daily basis and planning for. So Joe, we're talking about standard designs. Let's start to get into it a little bit. What
Yeah.
are some of the best practices on how you approach the process?
Oh, that's a great question. And you want to know something? I'm going to give you a simple answer. That's all. Let me say something too, by the way. Simple doesn't always mean easy. Okay? I'll give you an example what I'm talking about. I'm going to get a little off track here, but we got to keep it a little lively. So it's simple, right, to win the NASCAR race. That's the objective. That's not easy to do. Okay? Right? So simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, right? So now we get into this, it's simple what we want to try to do. Okay, and this is identify who the key stakeholders are. And in a large corporation, folks, that's talking about bringing your IT folks in with your facilities folks, okay, who are traditionally two separate sides of the house. The facilities people are the guys that are running the critical power and the UPSs and the critical cooling and all of this. And then the IT people are the people that are really putting the applications out there. But in order to do this the right way, we've got to bring the two stakeholders together. In fact, let's not forget about our security fronts too. Because as Brian mentioned earlier on, the edge and the resiliency and sometimes the security of that environment is oftentimes left to the side. So really, really important, guys, is to really bring in all of the stakeholders who have a place at the table. All right. That's a little bit different. We used to kind of build it, and then it was empty, and then people with computers, racks, and they would bring in, and then suddenly it came to life. Okay, that's not a real good way to do this here. What we need to try to do is bring in our stakeholders, okay, all together, because you know what, the IT people, and this goes to the second point here, they know what the resiliency in the application and how it's supposed to work, right? And if I know that from a facility side, maybe most likely I'm going to put together a design that accommodates the mission at hand. And imagine if we didn't do that. Imagine if we didn't do that. You could start to see costs go up because I might overbuild. All right. Yeah, your risk might be way low, but that's probably not in alignment to the business, right? Or worse, you can underbuild, your risk is way up here, and now your applications and services don't apply. Now your customer satisfaction goes out the window, right? So I think it's really important to bring in everybody, and it's very simple here. Identify the application's tolerance for risk. Design from there, okay? Once you do that, you're gonna have a really good feel for, and this is what your executive management is gonna be happy too, is that you're gonna put into place a program and design and an architecture that favors the business, that helps the business grow in an efficient way, not in an inefficient way. We used to overbuild, okay, often, overbuild. A few people underbuilt, and that changed when they had the loss of the business. And now we're learning how to basically move this all together into a tight knit and a more robust way of thinking. And in fact, we're starting to see this happen more and more and more. So successful organizations, Brian, I think, is going to be ones that really embrace this and figure out how to collaborate with all the key stakeholders. Sure. The other thing you got to think about too is is, and I know everything's most critical. I mean, nobody's gonna say, no, I'm not critical, right? So everybody's critical, but which it's got to be important that you really understand the service level expectations for the space that what you're serving, right? Okay, and also think about this. Brian mentioned this at the beginning, which I felt was really incredibly astute. Look, we cannot operate, we cannot design, and we cannot maintain the edge the way we did the old days. You alluded to that a little bit, right? And it's a little bit like a lights out facility, right? There, Brian mentioned there's no mechanics, there's no electricians, there's no security guard, and there's no DBAs or database administrators in 100 locations scattered across 200, 300 nautical miles. It's not possible to do. You can't do it, right? So having that understanding that, hey, we're not going to have those people there. We're not going to have those experts there. How do we, again, going back to equaling the risk to the business requirement is really, really important. And now it's a lights out facility. Sure. Right? And Brian, I know this is near and dear to your heart, right? If it's a lights out facility, one of the most important things is going to be our software app and applications being able to have some visibility into that environment, right? And so those are really, guys, I think the 2, 3, 4 things that are really, really top of mind as we start to think about a standard design.
Yeah, so now that we've really kind of hit on how you approach the process, the importance of standard designs, we've kind of mapped it out. Now we kind of switch gears a little bit and start thinking about the architecture itself. So Brian, what are the key components that need to be considered when starting to think about the architecture and designing?
Yeah, great question. So, look, once you start to digest and understand the business process requirements, as Joe talked about over the last 10 minutes or so, you do have to start looking at standard approaches to the architecture. And the reality is these edge sites, they're so critical to the business, yet they're often the most vulnerable sites within a portfolio or within the architecture. And so by taking, I'll say a 4-pronged approach to looking at architecture, you help to decrease that vulnerability. And so the first pillar, if you will, is around network connectivity and the service to that site, okay? The second pillar is around power and cooling, pretty straightforward. The third pillar is around physical security, right? Physical security is really the first step to good cybersecurity, and we know cybersecurity is really a huge topic within the industry today. And fourth, and often overlooked, and we keep coming back to this, is edge management. Edge management is essentially software. So it's that remote access, that remote visibility, that remote connectivity, so that you have even mobile, if you're using cloud-based architecture, even mobile connection to your sites and having live sensor data, okay? All 4 of these are critical, and having one without the other really puts some additional risk on your portfolio. Absolutely. And again, it's about balancing the risk versus the investment. But these are the 4 lenses that we would suggest that you look at standardizing around your architectures, and I think Joe's going to go into them a little more detail.
Yeah, so Joe, Brian really, as he just said, hit the 4 lenses of how you start to look at and manage the architecture, but you said it yourself, it may be simple to say, but not easy, right?
Right.
So each of these components, they come with their own sets of challenges. Right. So can you help walk us through each one of these, maybe highlight what the challenges are, but more importantly, dig into some recommendations on how you really navigate through it. We'll start with network connectivity.
Sure. Well, network connectivity is really key. It's really the driver for the edge, or as Brian kind of sort of mentioned too, the lack thereof with the speed of it now. The network is really, really important here. Without the network, okay, we're not going to be able to have the performance. And oftentimes what we find ourselves is within single sourcing this type of thing. It's a single point of failure, that network. And if the network goes down, we're dead in the water, most likely, right? Whether it's a wireless network, whether it's a hardwired network, without that connectivity, without that network, you're probably going to be in a little bit of a sort of a inefficient mode there. So I think a couple of things. I think, when and you all have these closets. I know when you look at the data center as we traditionally known it, it's very neat. It's very proper. There's wiring pathways, there's cable trays, there's separation of power versus data cabling and all of that type of stuff. When we start get into the small closets, the network closets, sometimes it's like this, and we have data cable intermingled with power cabling. We're not really sure. Oftentimes I see this a lot where there's abandoned cables. And it's just a complete mess of stuff. We don't know what we have. And so it's really important to start to organize that network and to organize your cable layouts and make sure that it's in a very sort of effective, made easy mode, right? Such as, wire labels, color codes, et cetera, so on. And oftentimes when we get into these remote areas where we're going to send somebody in there that's not managed on a day-to-day basis, one of the biggest things that happens is somebody goes, well, I wonder what this thing is. And so having label, having organization, as-built, drawings, panel schedules, all those things that are really important really start to optimize really some of this stuff on the network piece of it, okay? And it's not an easy thing to do. Now and once you get done with the network, then you get really into the big stuff, right?
Yep.
Right, now we start getting into the power and the cooling. And this becomes one of the things where it's boy, it could be, you could get lost in this very easily, right? We talked about the edge being dispersed a lot of different places, a lot of different, right? So is every site the same? Is every location the same size, the same footprint? Not. If you have that standard design, all of a sudden, right, these challenges start to become much more manageable, right? Where we can now start, since we know this is a standard design, we know exactly what the site requirement is, all right? And what it needs to be, which helps us now. All right, we're going to be able to provision power a lot easier, right? We're going to know how that cooling is going to work, and really important to match cooling to the load. Again, we talked about overbuilding, underbuilding. I think it's I think it's something that we've always have done. Is everybody wants to sort of err on the side of caution, except the CFO, right? And so he's erring on the side or she's erring on the side of caution too. But sometimes, so it's really important. I think when we get into this, the power and cooling's key, and this is why that standard design really, again, match to the application, match to the IT, match to the security, starts to bring this challenge a much more. It's manageable now. Okay, if we don't do it this way, we're going to reinvent the wheel every place we go. Imagine doing that. Right? So,
Joe, as it relates to UPS and power, one of the things that I'm seeing with customers on a regular basis is just this demand for long run times in these edge sites, right?
yes,
As the application becomes more critical, the runtime requirements are going from minutes to hours.
yes, you're right about that.
What are your thoughts on how we solve that at the edge? From a technology standpoint?
That's a great question. Well, it's I think technology is now matching what it's caught up to some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So if you would ask me this question, say 5 years ago, I'm not sure we really had a great answer.
Yeah.
I really not sure we had a great answer. And if we did have a great answer, it was way too big and way too costly. Okay? Today, we've got a little bit of a good answer for that, right? Lithium-ion technology has come a long way. It has come a tremendously long way. And now we're able to get some really long runtime and energy storage component, really, to where we can sometimes eliminate the need of a generator.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're really starting to come a long way with that. And here's the other thing, too. As I mentioned before, 5 years ago, cost high, footprint giant. This has now come down.
Sure.
Cost is way lower, footprint is much smaller. And to your point, now this starts to fit into this environment.
Yeah.
We really can start to think differently. Remember, we said at the beginning, you cannot approach the edge like you have traditionally approached your data center. Albeit it's a small data center and it's equally or sometimes more critical.
Yep.
Okay? We cannot approach it the same way. That's a great question.
Yeah.
All right? And this is a good technology that starts to show us why it's different.
Perfect.
Why it's different. And then as we think about what's different about it, this physical security component is big. So we've got 100 locations, they're all out there, right?
Just like your friend you said that just pulled the plug.
Right. It happens. All right. It happens. Physical security is very, very important. And a lot of these types of environments have been treated, well, I'm not going to say they weren't important, but they weren't treated with the same level of urgency and the same level of sort of, I'll call it a disaster fantasy. Because when we start getting into physical security, that's what we start to do, right? It's disaster fantasize. Well, what if this or what if that? And we're going to have to protect this and that. So physical security is a tremendously big component of the edge compute, right? More so than ever before because before in a distributed environment, I'll give you a quick story. In a distributed environment in an enterprise company, Fortune 500, if we lost a distributed environment, we might have lost 1 or 2 floors, okay, of intranet, maybe. Maybe we lost 200 or 300 people's somewhat productivity, but they were still able to do things. Remember, we had landline phones. Now we got VoIP, right? Okay, hey, that all matters, Now this environment goes down, and guess what? We are what we call dead in the water, right? Physical security in these environments is as important as the application itself, right? And you alluded to that. Physical security is the front door to and a key component to the cybersecurity end of it. Yes, they're 2 different things. We understand that, but if you're lacking your physical security, more oftentimes than not, you're lacking in that cybersecurity end as well, right? So now we come down to the real, I think, really one of the most important aspects here, okay, is it's great if you had all those other things that we just talked about. But if you miss the boat on this, you're gonna have this. I'm gonna guarantee this, okay? If you did everything else we talked about and you did it great, you're still but you don't do this piece, okay? What's gonna happen here is you're gonna have a high cost and high risk environment, okay? And that is the infrastructure management. Folks, you're gonna have to have eyes on this thing. We talked about it's lights out. There's nobody there. How do you best know what to do, when to do, and how to do it if there's no visibility into it? And today's software capability is better than it ever has been before, right? We're able to see things now faster, with more accuracy, across a wider spectrum of things, okay, than we ever have before. Used to be, if I was going to monitor a data center, and this is true for all your data center operators out there, I might have 5 systems with 5 different monitors, all right? That's not a very good, effective way to do that times 100 locations, right? So our software capabilities have come a tremendous long way recently to where now the spectrum of what we're able to see, monitor, and sometimes control, okay, is it's come full circle now, and that's really important at the edge, Brian. Really important at the edge.
Couldn't agree more. And I think for those companies out there who maybe don't have the resources available to deploy, there is a whole digital services offer out there that takes advantage of the software that you're referring to, whether it's cloud-based or on-prem. And you really can outsource the monitoring, the alarming, the analytics, the predictive side of things. So there's a lot of different ways to handle that.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think, and one quick comment on that, the centralization from a decentralized portfolio is key. Okay? So said another way, you might have 100 locations, but you should be able, you must have some type of centralized operation management and control.
Sure.
Okay?
So Joe, you've got me all excited.
Wow.
I've listened to everything you've gone through. I'm gonna get out of here, I'm gonna go do a standard design,
Yep.
okay? I'm gonna tackle the best practices, I'm gonna follow your map on the approach, right, to a standard design. I'm going to take considerations around the key components of the architecture. I'm gonna have network connectivity, power and cooling, physical security, and then the edge infrastructure management. What does that kind of look like? What is the end result? What are the key attributes, and are there really even reference designs out there that I can use to deploy all this stuff?
Oh, yeah. Great question, Andrew. Yeah, there are absolutely some reference designs out there. And the point real quick is that a reference design architecture is a starting point, say 80, 90, maybe 95% of what it should be or could be. But again, we talked about that reference architecture, bring in the right people, start with the reference architecture and build from there. And a reference architecture is gonna include critical power, okay? Okay, it's gonna include some cooling if required, depending on what type of location you have. Certainly, absolutely, certainly security, right? So these reference architectures should have a converged look to it.
Sure.
Power, cooling, security, control, monitoring, and when we start to talk about in the future episodes, the ecosystem that starts to come together, compute, network, and storage, all part of a solution. And when you get that, I think you what you end up with, and I think this is important to talk about, right? Is that you end up with efficient, flexible, adaptable, and usable design right off the bat. I can't tell you how many times we thought we were going to do something, halfway through it, a little something tweaked. The next thing you know, what we had thought about, and all of a sudden is a little bit or mostly irrelevant, right? So following this concept that we talked about, bringing in all of our stakeholders, identifying everything that we need to identify from the compute, from the application, from the use case, from its latency requirements, resiliency, redundancy requirements, how the whole system is built around it, all of a sudden leaves you with efficient, flexible, adaptable, which is, I think, very key, adaptable, okay?
Yep, I agree, and I think that ties it in nicely because ultimately that's what you need today in order to survive. So we're coming to a conclusion here. So when we think about all the topics that we just discussed today, we went through challenges, recommendations, we mapped out processes, but when you really think about it, what are the three things that you would want to leave everybody with based on our discussion today?
That's a good question. I think, for me, I think it's a couple of things. Again, I go back to the top line and think about, as a business, what does a business have to have in order to be successful? And to me, it's very simple, I think. Okay, a business needs an optimized cost and risk model, balanced to one another. Okay, a standard design is going to help us get there, really, really effectively. Okay, and then again, remember, we live in 2019. We want it now. We want it yesterday. Okay, okay. So a standard design starts to allow for rapid deployment. So when you think about this, everybody, a standard design starts to equal and optimize our risk and our cost model in a rapid deployable way. And at the end of the day, I think that starts to solve a good portion of the problems that were out there in the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, I'll add one, and I'll come back to one that's near and dear to my heart, which is I really believe that we need to design with connectivity in mind. And we talked a lot about software throughout the standards discussion here, but designing with that software in mind up front is critical. Save time post deployment. You really get a peace of mind during the operational phase of your infrastructure.
Right.
From the reporting that you get, from the fault notification that you get, and from the ability to actually interface with the infrastructure, interface with your team, interface with the company that's deployed the infrastructure for you. So designing with connectivity in mind really changes the game around these edge sites.
I agree with that completely. Good point.
Yep.
Outstanding.
So we covered a lot of topics. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you got a lot of value out of it. Hopefully it helped you better organize you in the business strategy that you're looking to manage moving forward. We'd love for you to tune in next time. In our next episode, we're going to jump into transparency and visibility and really hit a lot more on that edge infrastructure management that Brian harped on and Joe continued to discuss quite a bit. So I do want to point out that today was very much a level setting. We kind of reintroduced what edge in the distributed IT environment is and why it's so important. We hit on standard designs. But as we continue, we're going to bring some customers in, some clients, some different companies who've had quite a few different experiences in this arena. And we want them to talk to you a little bit about maybe some of their horror stories, maybe some of the ways that they were able to transition their business, optimize their environment, optimize their space, and hopefully improve their bottom line by deploying some things like this. So Joe and Brian, thank you so much for joining me. I think it was a great discussion. Hopefully you guys had a great time too.
Thanks
And
for
thank
having
you to
us.
everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you all.